So in this tutorial, I'll be having a look at some of the most important aspects of Coranto, a grade 6 Trinity College classical music piece. And Coranto is from the Fitzwilliam Virginal book, written by William Byrd during the 16th and early 17th century. And as the title suggests, Coranto means running. So it's quite a fast piece, looking at the tempo as well, which has a measure of 144 crotchet beats per bar. That's quite fast. If you play it a little bit slower, it's not the end of the world. Just know that the faster, the closest you can get to the actual title, the better. But quality over speed, I always say. So rather pace yourself and make an interesting performance rather than rushing and making too many mistakes. Now, Coranto is a type of dance that is usually written in triple meter. As you can see that we are going to count 3 crotchet beats per bar. And bringing out the character of this piece, since this wasn't originally written for modern day piano, it was written for a virginal. And a virginal was a type of harpsichord. So there weren't any dynamics and there weren't any ways and means of phrasing except with varying rhythm as well as making pause, almost like playing staccato. But we're not going to play staccato, that's very important. We're only going to play in a non-legato manner throughout the piece, while still doing legato in some cases as well. In terms of phrasing, as you can hear from the rhythm, we have this anacrusis at the beginning, and 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So the phrasing at the end of each bar, I would say, we have to articulate, especially with the ornamentation given in the piece as well. Let's quickly have a talk about dynamics before we start looking at notes. We should note that there's a lot of dynamics here, and one thing you should always remember is that we couldn't execute dynamics on a harpsichord-like instrument. So for modern day piano, when you see these kind of dynamic markings in these period pieces, you must note that that is an editorial suggestion, meaning that it's not necessarily to play like that. But because we're playing it on a modern day piano, we need to deploy some means of dynamics to make the piece not sound so mechanical. So that's very, very important. So we're not going to play everything it just sounds horrible. It sounds too heavy to the touch. and we need to make it light. It's a dance, and the tempo suggests running as well. We can't run if we stick to the keys like that. In certain cases, we need to take note of three-part voicing, especially in the left hand and near the cadence or during a cadence or cadential section. For example, in bars 5 and 6, we have this. We have a cadence there, and then we have another cadence there. And that's usually when we have these three-part voicing. And it's very important. We're going to hold down, for example, in bar 5, hold down that F. And then in bar 6 we have, and I like to keep that note short. So I'm not going to do that. It just helps to bring out the cadence, the character of the dance as well. And then we have that same section just with a little bit of a variation in the notes again a little bit later in bars 9 to 11. Ornamentation here is the biggest challenge, as there's two types that we need to take note of. The first one is the ornamentation found usually on the crotchet beats. For example, there in bar 1, right after the anacrusis, we have bar 1. We have this, and then we have this G sharp with two lines through it, and that's the first one we need to talk about, and that one we are going to execute. We start on the higher note, and this is quite common of the ornamentation used during the Baroque period, as we start with the top note and we end on the note given to us, the G sharp. So we're also going to make sure that when we play it, try to get the G sharp the loudest and not the A, like that, because that is the most important note. That's why it's also a very good idea to first just practice your right hand, left hand separately, know the piece well without the ornamentation. Okay, very important to try and know the piece well. I always teach my students to first do the right hand, know the right hand quite well, almost from memory, because the left hand is quite tricky to master because of all the chords and the dual voicing that we find in the left hand. And then adding the ornamentation later on requires some extra focus and some extra concentration. Remember, the ornamentation always are on the beat, so we're not going to play it beforehand, but if you sometimes play some of the notes beforehand, it's not the end of the world. You'll hear in my performance, I'm not always doing it on the beat, as long as it works within that particular beat. The second ornamentation that we have there is usually found on the minims, and we don't find it a lot during this piece. It's only found 2 or 3 times during the piece, and that is this longer look. For example, in bar 6 we have the ornamentation on the minim B, so we need to play for B. We're going to start with C, but we're going to do a turn. We're going to have to do a turn in order to get to that note. So we're not just going to do, not like that, we're going to, so there's going to be a turn. The best way of practicing the ornamentation is to do a scale and just practice each variation of the ornamentation. So, first one. Trying to focus on the last note being louder. With the second one, and it's very important to try and articulate each note of the ornamentation so that it is clear and crisp. So be careful not to. Don't keep so fingers need to be lightly and they need to move quickly. And with this piece, the fingering suggestions suggest that we should play all the ornamentation with the third and second finger. Or and so on. So when you practice implementing the ornamentation, try to use the same fingers throughout. Otherwise, it's going to be very confusing. And also remember, the fourth finger is weaker and shorter than the third finger. It's easier to bend the second finger and play the ornamentation with these two fingers than doing it with these two fingers, the third and fourth fingers. So second and third is key. Once you know the left and right hand quite well, place them hands together and slowly and lightly start to implement the trills. So like so and on. Also very important, you can hear that some of my chords in the left hand, I arpeggiate. I make them into a quick arpeggio roll. Like when I started with my performance, I had this. There I roll again. The reason I do this is to make the harmonic structure a little bit more interesting, but also to help me phrase better and bring out the dance character. Remember, we need to add, otherwise if we don't do that, it's going to sound quite boring. It's not going to sound like a real dance typical of the period. And during that time, they would have rolled some or arpeggiated some of the left hand chords as well. So make sure that you try and implement some of those rolls, but not too much. Try to think about the phrasing, or you can use my example or speak to your teacher regarding that as well. In terms of notes, the piece isn't difficult. What makes the piece difficult is the ornamentation as well as the phrasing that we need to think about, and also the chords in the left hand. So take your time when you learn and study this piece. Make sure that you take notes of as much information as possible in order to execute the piece well. So there's a lot to think about this piece. You can have a look at my performance. You can have a look at many different performances that you can find on YouTube, and try to give it your own style and your own character, but keep within the period that the piece was written. That is very, very important. If you like this video, please remember to subscribe as well as to check that your notifications are turned on for any future videos. Thanks for watching.